Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer. Welcome to Lost in the Wasteland, my weekly interview show where I get to learn a little bit more about somebody else's perspective on movies. And this time, diving into a very particular film, is my buddy Heath from SiftPop back on for yet another film interview. Heath, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Shane, for having me. I appreciate it as always.
Absolutely. And the hills are alive with conversations about the sound of music.
Yep.
And we'll be diving into the film in a bit. But Heath, would you like to shamelessly plug anything where people can check out your work before we dive in?
Yeah, you can find me on SiftPop or Shortboxed. You can also find me more readily on Letterboxd. Search the one Heath Bar or Heath Lynch. Either one should find me. I review way too much crap and I write way too many words. And if you're into that, cool. And if not, I'm sorry.
And also one of my personal favorite names on Letterboxd.
Yep.
It's right up there with rowing a boat.
Yep. That one's
So,
a good one too.
but we like to have fun around here.
Yep.
But apparently I'm no fun. I'm all about branding. But we're going to be talking about one of the most classic musicals in history from 1965 from director Robert Wise, starring Julie Andrews and a man that thought this was a silly movie, Christopher Plummer. Uh, got them paycheck movies,
Yep.
which is so crazy. It's most iconic role. He just, yeah, whatever.
Most iconic role in the movie doesn't work without him at all.
Yep, absolutely. But this is indeed the story of a young novice is sent by her convent in 1930s Austria to become a governess to 7 children of a widowed naval officer. It's about nuns, it's about Nazis, and it's about singing. So,
A lot of singing.
a lot of singing. Now, Heath, why did you choose this particular film as part of your film curriculum?
So I think that this is an important film for two reasons. One is it's a musical. Now that may seem silly and trite on the surface, but if you're going to talk about the history of cinema, it is impossible to dissect the history of cinema without talking about musicals. Nowadays, we might get one musical every 2 to 3 years, sometimes every 5 years. The fact that last year in 2022, we got not one, not two, but three decent musicals was shocking. If you actually go back to uh yeah, no, because what that was Tick Tick Boom, West Side Story, and In the
In the
Heights.
Heights.
And there were actually more musicals than that. I just wouldn't say they were good. I won't name them. But the fact that that happened is insane. I mean, there was a solid, felt like decade there in the 90s. And then again in like the late 2000s, 2010s, where musicals just didn't exist. And it's been like this for a while. But that's the now. And if you go through the history of cinema, you look at the golden age of Hollywood is littered with musicals. In fact, they were a staple of film up until about the 70s and the new wave of American cinema. Uh, so you really can't talk about film unless you acknowledge the role and importance of musicals. And to that end, well, if you're going to talk about musicals, you might want to talk about a good one. And so that's why I picked Sound of Music, which is, by all intents and purposes, you could have debates, but it is, even if you're having debates, it is pretty unanimously considered one of the best musicals of all time. That's like not even up for debate. The only question is, where do you rank it? Is it number one? Is it number three? It's in the top five. That's a guarantee. Maybe it's probably even in the guarantee top three. Like, that's just how good it is. So I think that's why I would choose it. It's, the idea of how musicals correspond to film as a medium versus how they are generally, not always, sometimes things are direct to film, but generally adapted from a stage production, those inspirational points and how they transpire between mediums, what you can do with the cinematic scope versus a stage production. All of these things make musicals a fascinating subject and one worth studying in any kind of curriculum.
Absolutely. And you think about, you mentioned the 1970s, it's like, well, we got to stop singing, start
Yep.
brooding. It was a
Yeah.
very different time. And even the musicals that did come
Conspiracies
out of
everywhere.
well, and even if you talk about the musicals at that time, very Bob Fosse,
Yeah.
very different kind of musicals than you're experiencing. And I feel like the musical has really only substantially lived on in animation over the past
Yes.
couple of decades. Obviously,
And you
we
can
do get
largely thank Disney because of that too.
100%. We do luck out when we have a year like we got Tick Tick Boom and West Side Story and In the Heights, but usually it's getting a bunch of Disney musicals and
Mm-hmm.
then other animation studios trying to rip off Disney.
And even
Honestly.
still, if you've noticed Disney in recent years, I would say in their post experimental area, more their revival era, they do an alternating format of
Yeah.
musical, non-musical, musical, non-musical. And they've been doing that for several years now. So I mean, like last year we got Strange World. That wasn't a musical, but the year before that we got Encanto, and that was a
Yeah.
musical. And like uh, I know that later they have a movie coming out this year called Wish. I don't really know much about it, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's a musical because that's
Yeah.
just kind of their pattern these days. But yeah, so even in the one industry where musicals are prevalent, animation, they're even not that prevalent anymore.
Mhm. And like you could look at a year like 2016, it's like you had Moana, but you had Zootopia.
Yep.
Like finding that kind of balance. But my first main question for you, Heath, is thinking about obviously this is a film that is from that golden era of Hollywood musicals before things kind of shifted away from that. What makes this particular film stand out so much amongst its peers of the time in that golden age of
Sure.
musicals?
I think it's again, as with most things, it's not a simple one singular answer. Although there is a question we'll talk about later that's pretty definitive. There's one answer. But this one you have to start with the core subject material. And when I talk about the subject material, I'm not talking about the narrative of the story. I'm talking the actual stage play material that it's based off of. And that's the fact that this is Rodgers and Hammerstein. Now, Rodgers and Hammerstein, depending on how old you are, is a name you either do or do not get. Like
Yeah.
it's not, unfortunately, we're reaching more and more of a time where probably less and less people know this name. These two innovators of musical and stage production, um, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II. I'm going to go over a brief rundown. I'm not going to talk about them, but
Yeah.
here's some of their works. I'm sure you've heard of some of these: Oklahoma, Carousel, State Fair, South Pacific, The King and I, Cinderella, a stage production of it, and Flower Drum Song, and The Sound of Music. If you know anything about musicals at all, you probably recognize 80% of those titles I just listed. Even if you are not a musical person,
Mhm.
you recognize some of those titles just in conversation. Oh yeah, I've heard people sing the song Oklahoma, or I know of it. Oh yeah, I know of Sound of Music. Like I've heard of The King and I. Like their influence is so pervasive in Broadway and theater,
Yep.
in particular in the realm of the musical, that uh, their accolades can't be stressed enough. But because of that, they are able to bring so much gravitas to this book, this stage book, where the words coming from these characters feel genuine and
Mhm.
poignant, with purpose, but still with flaws and character and a unique sense of quality to them. And simultaneously, you have, and this is a big reason why it stood the test of time as well, some of the most catchy, influential, memorable music maybe in any musical ever. Um, and it's the songs, it's the actual instrumentals themselves, it's the lyrics, it's so pervasive in our society that there's people that probably don't even know uh where some of these songs come from,
Mm.
but they've just heard them. And as an example to that, you mentioned someone said a row in a boat. Our friend Rowan would, his letterbox review of this movie, just as an example, Every time a new song started playing, I stood there open mouthed and either thought or said aloud, "That's from this musical?" Yes.
Yes.
Like that's just the kind of impact. Like
Mhm.
even if you've never seen the film or you've never seen the stage play, this music is so universal and has been spread throughout so many other properties and memed and parodied or tributed
Yeah.
and beloved and respected throughout the course of this movie is almost 60 years old, but you wouldn't know it because this music is everywhere. So a combination of Rodgers and Hammerstein being the goats of musicals, or at least the classic goats
Yeah.
of musicals, um, the music itself being so poignant, and beyond that, you have smashing performances, especially from our two leads. Really impressive child acting performances, which is a rarity even today. And
Yeah.
it's incredible how well these child actors hold up. And this is the unfortunate part of the movie, but it is the reality, which is its cultural impact due to its reality-based story based on real life history with World War II and Nazis and the Holocaust and persecution. Um, that grounds this story in the end of this film so much that that's a big reason why it carries on, is because
Mhm.
the themes that are derived from this ever potent threat that's looming over the entire film and grows like such a dark cloud by the end of the movie's runtime, that the there's so much relatability, and you can
Yep.
extrapolate that even to today's culture and what certain cultures, societies,
Yep.
countries, governments are doing around the world. So it's just like, yeah, it's hard not for this to stand the test of time when it does virtually everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, some of these things are a little too relevant today.
Yeah.
And that's an uncomfortable truth. And one thing I really appreciate that you mentioned is like that moment where you realize where like a really famous song is from. I
Hmm.
once had an argument with a friend who I will not name about the song Matchmaker.
Oh, I love that music too.
And I'm just like, it's 100% from Fiddler on a Roof.
Yeah.
And they were trying to argue with me. It was from Oklahoma. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's
No, no, it's not.
and I'm like, it's very Jewish. It's like really Jewish. And it's just like, that's exactly where that came from. Because like I had no idea where that was from when I watched Mrs. Doubtfire when I was a kid.
Yep.
And they started saying, matchmaker, matchmaker. It's just like
And
that's
of
where it
course,
all
Robin Williams would do that just spontaneously.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's that kind of cultural impact that
Yep.
something like this has. And you brought up a big point too about, these were big stage productions coming to the big screen. How do you feel like Wise and everybody else involved in this film maximize the format as like this is a cinematic experience versus something on a stage?
Yeah. One of the biggest things that they smartly do is they stretch the impression of time. Time is so relative in any medium that tells a story of this nature, whether that's a novel, novella, comic book, stage production, movie. You could go on. But cinema has a way of doing that a little bit. Let's just gives them that little bit of extra nudge, on a stage production. And I've seen Sound of Music actually multiple times as a stage production as well. There's only so much you can do with a set that's finite,
Yeah.
non-moving, and usually when you do the Sound of Music, you're doing the set is their house, the Von Trapp house. Every once in a while they'll also do the Abbey and then the final theater. um it depends on the producer and the director and what kind of personal flares they want to put on it, but the Von Trapp house is virtually all you can do. But that's not to say exactly how much time passes.
Mhm.
You could make a solid argument watching this production that maybe a few days go by, maybe a week, two. You could make that argument. Now, I would say that the kinetic natures of the relationships between Maria and the children and the burgeoning romance between the captain and Maria kind of negate that, just in terms of a common sense frame of mind of, oh yeah, these things don't happen overnight. But in the film, you actually get that passage of time. We see them traveling to the town and spending time with the kids and different events in their life as they move around. We see the captain leave to Austria and come back, and it's referenced how much time goes by when he does this and how long these trips are. You can even see the seasons kind of changing around them, though it's mostly summer and green and lush. It's not that way throughout the entire movie. You can especially tell in their dress and the type of clothing that they're wearing. So that sense of time is something that is unique to the medium of film, and it's the production of Sound of Music in this regard. And because of that, the movie itself, the narrative, feels much more sincere. It's much more relatable because I can believe all of these relationships versus, oh yeah, you met these kids and in 2 days they loved you, and in 4 days you fell in love with the captain. Well, okay, now you're getting to Disney points of view, but the movie doesn't do that. Additionally, in terms of a cinematic experience versus a stage performance, you have texture to the world building. Again, kind of going off of what I was saying about a stage production, usually you just have the Von Trapp house, and that's what it is. But here we see lush, beautiful vistas, landscapes. You see them riding trains up a mountain. You see them visiting a town. You literally see the kids hanging from trees and swinging around and playing. You see these actual iconic landmarks in Austria, which Hollywood, and not everything needs to be green screen. I just saw Fast X the other day, and just they were never in Rome, and it's so clear that they were never in Rome. But there's an entire action sequence that lasts 25 to 30 minutes of this bomb bouncing around the streets of Rome, and it's so obviously all fake in the stage. And I just miss these eras where, yeah, you would buck up the dollars, and the studio would go and film on location. Unless it's a Marvel movie and we're filming and it's an alien planet, Hollywood, please take note. Like, go on location filming. All right, there's my rant. But yeah, you can see Austria, and Austria feels like a character in this movie, especially the ending of this movie, the final theater they play in. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Everyone in Austria, the millions of you that I know are watching. The Felsen Royschel, I believe it's pronounced Felsen Royschel Theater, is a real theater, an iconic landmark in Austria where they actually sang these songs at the end of the movie. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Not only is the architecture feel so sincere, it feels ancient. It feels like that was around during the time of the Romans. I doubt it was, but it feels like it. It feels like
amphitheater.
Yeah, it's a giant amphitheater. It feels like, they performed Othello there or something. Again, I doubt that that's the case, but that's just the impression that you get.
Yeah.
But it also gives you this unique architecture so that like these archways can be backlit. So you have these standing silhouette figures of these haunting Nazi soldiers, like just standing in the wings, not letting anyone escape. And it's just stuff like that is so unique to the film version of this that cannot possibly be captured in a stage production.
Well, and like even from like the opening shot, it's just like they're literal hills and mountains that like you feel it.
Yeah.
And like I can't imagine like watching this and not actually seeing that and feeling that as a part of it.
For anyone that hasn't seen Sound of Music, and hopefully this podcast convinces you to, you probably more likely, because it's much more recent, have seen Beauty and the Beast. If you remember the scene at the beginning of Beauty and the Beast where Belle runs from her house and spins around in an open field at the beginning of the movie, that's an homage to this movie where we see that exact scene play out, because Julie Andrews runs out into a field on a hill and she spins around in circles and is singing The Sound of Music as there are literal gigantic mountains behind her. The Alps are behind her, and it's gorgeous.
Gorgeous. It's like, it was no wonder, like, if I'm not mistaken, this did get nominated for cinematography for a color picture. Lost to Dr. Zhivago, if I'm not mistaken. What a year. Now, obviously, this is more of like specifically probably a more subjective question, but like, Heath, what do you feel like is the biggest asset of this movie?
So this is the one where, and yes, it did lose to Dr. Zhivago, in two categories: art direction color and cinematography color, which boo. Um, uh, so you said earlier, and you were asking questions. I said there's one where it is a definitive singular answer, and you're hard pressed to have anyone disagree with this. Julie Andrews is the largest asset of this movie, and it's really not even close. So a little bit of background on Julie Andrews, who is a name that resides mostly in legend now. She is still acting, but she unfortunately she doesn't like people seeing her these days. She's very self-conscious about her looks and her appearance as she has aged. All due respect to her, she's a beautiful woman, and I think we would all love her regardless, but that's her prerogative. If she doesn't want to put herself out there, that's fine. But she still does voice acting. You probably most recently heard her. She was the voice of the Leviathan Kraken in Aquaman. Like, she's still doing stuff. Which, God, I would have never pictured her doing a comic book movie like that all those years ago. And it's so funny. But here, I mean, she's iconic. She's legendary. Yeah. To put it in perspective, Julie Andrews was a stage goddess. Like, her voice in her prime is masterful. It's one of the best voices I can think of in history, like in the history of music, film, theater, anything. It's probably top 10 up there for me, maybe even top 5. It is impressive. And she got her start through theater, and she did theater through the 50s. And one of her big breakout roles was a little thing called My Fair Lady that you've probably heard of. She was the original My Fair Lady in the Broadway run of that play from 1956 through 1959. And she went on eventually to do other stuff. What they were going to do, though, is then adapt My Fair Lady, and they were going to make a film version of it. And this is very iconic and notable, is that people didn't think she would cross over well. They didn't think she'd be a good film actor. And so they didn't give her her own part. They gave Audrey Hepburn the part of the lead in My Fair Lady. And what's ironic is that same year, another company did decide to give her a chance. And that company was the Walt Disney Corporation, and Walt decided to cast her as the lead in a little movie called Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins went on to blow people out of the water that year, and Julie got an Oscar for Best Actress that same year against My Fair Lady. So that's like one of the greatest petty revenge things I've ever heard in the history of Hollywood. It's almost feels scripted, but it's real and it happened. But so that's like her transition into film. And then the very next year, after she does Poppins in 64, in 65, she comes out with this. Like, instantly, back-to-back years, solidifying herself as a musical talent unrivaled by anyone else.
Yeah.
She is the chase actress in Hollywood. You want her in your picture. These are movies that are nominated for Best Picture. Sound of Music wins Best Picture, is nominated for, I think, like almost 10 or 11 awards or something, and it wins like 5 of them. Including her for Best Actress. But it's her voice that is so unique. It's so powerful. The way she delivers so much compassion and emotion through it in songs like The Sound of Music, or so much joy and comfort in My Favorite Things, or just the way she delivers empathy to these children, the way she shows them compassion even when they don't show her compassion, the way she portrays her feelings of love. One of the most charming and cute scenes in the whole movie is when she gets embarrassed that she realizes, yes, she loves the captain, and she starts to blush, and it's just so endearing and heartwarming. And it feels so genuine and raw. So I would think Julie Andrews is the largest asset. I don't even think it's close. The only thing that's in the contention is, again, someone that we joked about earlier, who didn't even think this was a serious movie, thought it was a silly joke, was Christopher Plummer, because he's also vital to this film, and his performance is no slouch either. In fact, I would even go so far as to say, as although this is Julie Andrews' movie and Maria is the main character, the captain is the catalyst for this film. If it's not for his switch over and his change of heart, this story doesn't work at all. It's the story is about saving him from his own self-destructive ways. So his performance is great, but yeah, in terms of the largest asset, I'm definitely going Julie Andrews.
Yeah, I my biggest first celebrity crush was Julie Andrews, and that hasn't stopped
Yeah.
for when I was a kid. She's nearly perfect in every way.
Yeah.
And it's just her voice is incredible.
Yeah.
And her charisma is insane. It's off the charts. And she can do so much. And like especially with Maria in this film, she's a bit clownish at times. She's a bit just her abruptly running into the convent and all the nuns who are straight throwing shade at her behind her
Yep.
back. I'll just stare at her and she looked mortified when she comes in. It's just all those little things from her performance are amazing. And actually, here's a lovely segue into my next question because you started talking about some of her songs. What do you feel like are those musical numbers in this film that stand out the most?
This is so hard for me. This was the hardest question because there is no one
All
answer.
of them.
Like I am going to virtually list all of them. There are a few songs that I would say I don't care for as much. Now, that's not to say they're bad songs. In fact, some of them are objectively good songs. There's one song that is just not my cup of tea due to the pace, the tempo, the lyrics. It just doesn't float my boat. But I recognize from a skill set, a vocal skill set, might be actually the most challenging song in the musical. I'll get to that in a second. So I think the song that does it for me the most, because I think it fully embodies the joy and rapture of this movie. When the movie is joyous and rapturous, it doesn't stay that way. But I think in its peak in the first act before the intermission is when this movie is the most engaging and entertaining. Do Re Mi is such a fun and perfect song. It embodies the joyful youth and innocence of childhood, which is so much about what this movie is about, and is speaking to the next generation, trying to warn them and prepare them for what is to come, even if that's as simple as learning how to sing a song so you can calm yourself and feel happier. So I love Do Re Mi. My other emotional pick would be Edelweiss. I think Edelweiss is beautiful when that is sung at the theater at the end of the movie by the captain, and he starts getting choked up and he can't even finish it. But then the entire theater, the family chimes in, and then the entire theater starts singing along. Literally brings me to tears. I think it is absolutely beautiful and wholly moving from an emotional standpoint. Those are my two favorite songs, but other songs that I love include obviously the titular Sound of Music.
Yep.
Maria is hilarious. I love that they literally call her a clown. That movie's great. 16 going on 17, although that relationship is doomed to fail, it still kind of embodies that like
Little
that teenage
Nazi.
that teenage like puppy dog love that all of us have experienced at some point in our lives. I love So Long Farewell, the little kids song. Again, just charming and quaint. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this for my mom, which I love this song as well, but this is easily my mom's favorite song, and that's My Favorite Things. I don't really know at what point this turned into a Christmas song, but we hear it almost every year at Christmas time now. I know that there is a reference in the lyrics to sleigh bells, but other than that, there's like nothing Christmassy about the song. But still, you hear it at Christmas
People
time.
find a stretch to get it.
Yeah, they'll stretch to make it work. But I those are some of my favorites. The ones that don't do it for me as much, and again, I stress these are still good songs. They're just not personally my favorite. Something Good with Maria and the captain, their love ballad in the second act is just a kind of blasé for me. The Lonely Goat Herd, the yodeling song is what it's also sometimes called, although incredibly cute and funny, has very little purpose. It's just fun.
It's one of those like it's a very specific kind of thing watching musicals from this era. I remember watching My Fair Lady for the first time and just being like, why the hell's this song in this movie? Why is this song in this
That
movie? And
so this is a good tangent because this is actually something, again, we talk about the golden age of Hollywood and
yeah,
musicals. To pad run times, this was just something they did. There was
yeah,
usually one song that was almost inconsequential to the overall narrative itself that was just there to give another song.
yeah,
In this case, it is very clearly the Lonely Goat Herd,
yeah,
the yodeling song, which has no purpose whatsoever narratively in the story. It never has in both the stage production and the film version, which actually they are different in terms of narrative. The songs come in different orders and stuff like that, but still, it's a cute song. Because it has no purpose, I
gotta
don't care for
show
it that
off
much.
them puppets.
Yeah. The song that I think is actually critically impressive in terms of its skill set and composition, but just doesn't do it for me, is the song from Mother Abbess in the Abbey, Climb Every Mountain.
Yeah,
When she hits those final notes, damn, like it is just astounding. It's arguably a better vocal performance than anything Julie Andrew does the entire movie. Like that's just how good it is. In fact, every time I've seen this production live, that's the song and that's the performance that gets people on their feet and clapping and just like losing their minds in the audience more than any of the other songs, because that's
yeah.
the one that from a vocal perspective it requires such range and skill. But again, I just, as much as I recognize it for its quality, I don't find it to be a very fun song to listen to. It's not really entertaining. But so
Got
there's
her an
my takes
Oscar
on.
nomination,
Yeah,
best
yeah,
supporting actress. So there you
yep,
go.
yep. It is usually a very lauded role to be in. It's, if you can't be Maria, you want to be Mother Abbess.
Yep.
So
I feel like the one that I probably had the most fun with out of this whole film is definitely Maria.
yeah.
It just, you learn so much about her as a character, and it's also like the most petty
Yeah.
song in the, it's just so, them just throwing all the shade, and like the tall nun, she just
Oh,
straight
she is spiteful. She is.
go straight for it. But she gets her redemptive moment at the end of the film. Like, okay, I can't hate you that much.
Yeah.
But to be fair, she's probably just frustrated. To
Yeah.
be honest, she has to deal with Maria's crap all the time.
I will never not love the fact that they use the words flibberty gibbet and will o' the wisps in
Yeah,
in the song, which are words you don't hear in common vernacular as it is, let alone in lyrical form. Like, oh my God, to pull that off.
yep, works so well. I feel like this one we've kind of talked a decent amount about, but is if you have anything else to add specifically about why you feel like this film is timeless.
I think it's the relatability of the family. There is an overarching theme that I think there's several themes throughout the movie in terms of love, acceptance, understanding, and growing and nurturing and maturing, so on and so forth. But I think the overall theme that's the most prevalent is uh, the relatability of family slash seeking acceptance in the world. Now you can extrapolate to this to Maria is needing to find some place in the world. She doesn't fit in at the Abbey. She didn't fit in anywhere in life before she even went to the Abbey. The Abbey and almost was a last resort in her
Yeah,
mind. And now as the last resort, well, now she's trying to find a place as a governess. But these children are trying to find their place in the world. They're feeling isolated and without direction because their mother is gone and their father is always away, so they feel like they don't have the parental guidance that they need. Captain Von Trapp is struggling in the woods as well because he's lost, because he has no one to help him from an emotional perspective, no one to help guide these children because he doesn't know how, because he's lost touch with his own sense of emotion. He's put up too many barriers, so he can't open up to his own kids. So this sense of relatability of family, but really just seeking acceptance in your place in the world and trying to find some kind of community. In this case, it is a literal family, but really just the movie's about community, is very pervasive. And that even ties into the overall themes about fascism and Nazism of, again, trying to find a place in the world, trying to find a sense of community and understanding where we can have compassion, where we can expel hateful rhetoric and thoughts that are dangerous to society. We're trying to seek a place of love, not a place of hate. So these themes of acceptance, tolerance, understanding, learning to have compassion and empathy for one another, learning to relate to one another, apply to these characters on individual levels in their family dynamic, but also on the more global scale level of as countries coming together and trying to fight off something that is destructive. I think that is kind of what makes it so timeless, is although these themes aren't directly spoken to in the words I'm saying, they are very clearly there, and you can't escape the movie without feeling that kind of compassion. And because of that, that's why the movie will always be timeless, because that's an impossible thing to not relate to.
It's so interesting because it's like thinking 2023, you have one of the biggest franchises in the world. It's all about, and I know this is going to come off sounding like a joke, but it's all about family.
It's all about family.
Finding a sense of family and community and feeling like you're a part of something. And Fast and Furious has completely jumped the shark, but like at least
a long time ago,
it's still about that though, or at least it's trying to be, or at least it tells you that it is. Vin Diesel's right there telling us. And like I just literally just watched About My Father, and like one of the main lines of the whole film is like, family isn't just an important thing, it's everything. And being an Italian American, that's 100% true. You ask any Italian person to just be like, what are you doing to your family? And it's that kind of sense of like, so many people can connect to that, from literal family or finding a family, finding where you can belong and where you can feel safe and loved and not judged. And that's a big journey of Maria, because at the Abbey she is judged. Just talking about a whole entire song about a bunch of nuns judging her, and her finding this Von Trapp family and just being pulled in, and probably a little bit more than she expected. Obviously, because she falls in love with Captain and everything, which we'll get to that in a minute. But I think Heath, I appreciate how you balance that, like themes about family, themes about like the greater ideas of facing fascism and stuff like that, because what do you feel like are the elements of this film that helped it balance, like, this is dealing with the oncoming invasion of the Nazis and World War II and the Holocaust, and then a film about like this governess running around with kids singing Do Re Mi and singing about goats and stuff. It's like, how does this film balance all of that so well?
The crazy thing is I used to think it didn't. I used to think less of this film. Now, over the years and rewatches and just my own sense of maturity and understanding of the world and picking up on themes in film, I've completely changed course on that matter. But I used to always think like, oh yeah, the first half of this film is just fun and they don't mention anything dark or sad ever, and it's always happy. And then the second half, just Nazis, they're everywhere out of nowhere. And I didn't understand, like, but when you actually are paying attention, it's there the whole time. In fact, the only reason why it feels so abrupt is the fact that this film has an intermission. If this movie did not have an intermission that clearly defined Act 1 from Act 2, as most theater productions are just 2 acts, you wouldn't get the sense that, oh, just Nazis are here. Like if you take out that 5-minute break and just go right into Maria coming back from the Abbey, falling in love with the captain, them getting married, it feels incredibly natural, because right from the beginning, you see, I think the first mention of it is Ralph delivering the very first telegram, but before the 16 going on 17 song. So we're still like I don't know, 15 minutes into the movie. It's not far. This is a long movie. We're not a big chunk into this film. And I think the butler asks Ralph right away, like, so what's the news on the front, or what's going on with the Third Reich, or I forget exactly how he phrases it, but like from that point on, it's there.
Yeah.
You see the relatives mention it, the crazy Uncle Max. He talks about how he's kind of agnostic towards politics, but really this story shows how you can't be agnostic to things, whether you're trying. It's almost like even today, like, okay, you can choose to not care about politics and to not vote, but whether you don't care about politics and you don't vote or not, politics are affecting your life. So if you want to do nothing about it, that's your prerogative, but it does matter, and it does change you, and it changes all of us. And that's the point. So this film does a brilliant job of carefully seeding all these things, and it builds and it builds and it builds to, when they go to they have the dinner party, and there's a couple members of the Nazi party at the dinner party. This is still the first half of the film, mind you, when it's supposed to be all lovey and dovey. Just a few minutes after that, they sing "So Long Farewell" about cuckoo clocks and going up the stairs to sleep, but like at that very party, there were still Nazis kind of getting in the captain's face about, hey, would you be ready for Hitler and all that? Or when he does return from his honeymoon, he has to pull down a Nazi flag and rip it in half, which, I love that scene. Christopher Plummer looks so pissed. It just seems so genuine, and I appreciate it so much. But because it does such a well seeding that, and because once you take the mental block out of the intermission out of your mind and really take this as a complete thing without break or separation, even the music itself, all the songs in the second half are traditionally getting slower in tempo, lower in tone in terms of musical notes, an octave register, even in terms of the lyrics that it's portraying. The music is more nostalgic and reflective on love in the past, especially when they're at the theater. We're singing the songs that we've already loved from the beginning half of the movie. We're doing reprisals of them, but we're not as happy, because the Nazis are all around and we're trying to escape and we can't. And again, I go back to that very moving performance of Edelweiss, where the entire country of Austria, it feels like, is singing along with them, as if that's the last moment Austria will be Austria. And the moment that song dies, the Nazis have taken Austria. Like, that's how powerful that moment is. So it's really quite impressive how all the conjoining themes about family and about globalism and the proper seating. Again, if you asked a younger me, I would say it doesn't handle it well. But me now says, man, that is one of the most brilliant transitions I've literally ever seen in the history of film, to go from this cute, quaint movie about kids playing in trees to Nazis. And you'd think it switches on a dime, but it doesn't. And it feels so natural and so earned. And again, that even ties into the overall themes of like, that's why we need, community. We need love. We need acceptance and compassion and communication, because there is that danger lurking out there. If we don't learn to tolerate and accept and help one another, that is what's out there. And it can be pervasive, and it can come from nowhere and overtake you if you're not careful.
Yeah, I rewatched this on Mother's Day with my mom, who absolutely loves this movie.
Yep.
And that was actually one of the things that I noticed the most about watching this now in my 30s is they lay the groundwork so well in this film, from the little comments to like you mentioned, delivering the telegram. There's so many layers to some of the comments being made, and him throughout the film slowly turning. And I feel like he's kind of like an anchoring figure, because he is that youth who's being warped.
Yep.
And
he is the radicalized nationalist, like, perfectly.
And that's such a satisfying moment where the captain just rails into that guy at the party.
Yeah.
And just like, not taking your crap, man.
Yep.
And it feels so good. this film is so rebellious, and
Yes.
I love it. Even the nuns get in on it.
Yeah.
They're just like,
Just destroying the car. It's
yeah,
great.
I'm afraid I've committed a sin. Just like pieces of a car. Just like, yep, got him. Now, only a few more questions, but it's so there's so much going on in this film, and you'd think, oh, there's a romance at the center of this. So hard to make romances in film feel genuine.
Yes.
What do you feel like is like that recipe that makes this romance between Maria and the captain work so well?
So before I get into that, related to what you just said, this is my mother's favorite film as well. In fact,
Yeah,
my mom loves this movie so much that when she got married, she based her dress, in particular the really long veil, off of Maria's dress and veil from this movie. So my mom had
respect.
a massively long veil that hit the ground and drug for like 15 feet behind her on the ground. So when we say this love story works, and people have felt that this love story works for decades.
Yep.
Like, we can attribute the love story in this movie to the very reason I'm here, because my mom believed in love, almost in part because of this movie. Of course, other things as well, but still. So what I think is so fascinating about the love story in this between Maria and the captain. I know we keep saying the captain, Captain Von Trapp, but that's literally, I think, his name. I don't think they actually give us his first name. He's just the captain. It's so weird in hindsight now that I think about that. Regardless,
It's Garrig or
oh, Georg. That's right.
Georg. Yep.
That's right. Now I remember it. Captain sounds better. All right. Um, each of these characters are flawed.
Yep.
And each of them fills the hole that the other one needs. And I think that's why they work so well, and simultaneously why the love is so believable. So Maria is willing to stand up to the captain in a way that no one else is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, we didn't see
it.
the captain in his previous marriage, but you get the sense that maybe Maria was kind of like his past wife. This is someone who's willing to stand up to him, to kind of put him back in his place when he gets too overly aggressive, but more than anything, to make him remember how to love life.
Mm-hmm.
And that life can be beautiful. Not everything has to be so structured and regimented. You can be a little bit more free going, artistic. You can love music. You can appreciate dance. You can love your children. And I think that that's something that he forgot in the terms of losing his wife and putting up natural barriers to kind of cover that pain. And I could even see that as being believable as well. Like, a parent loses their significant other and is now a widow, and they have to raise their kids by themselves. You bet that they're going to be damaged, and they're not going to be able to show it all, because they have to immediately, help their children grieve and help their kids keep living their lives. It's almost as if you don't have time to grieve yourself. And so that inherently puts up natural barriers, and Maria is there to break those down and remind him how beautiful life can be. Simultaneously, Maria's whole flaw, if you could call it a flaw, is that she completely lacks direction and confidence within herself. She has no idea what a structured life is. She has no idea what to do with herself. But with the captain, she can be herself, and she understands that her greatest power and what she wants to do with life is help others, to help others through her compassion and through her understanding. And the captain enables that. He wants her to have the best situation for herself, that he doesn't want her to feel lonely and isolated either, and that he wants to provide for her in a way that she can be happy with these kids that she's grown such companionship with and such connection with. So it's really, they're two halves of a whole, and they are one of the greatest examples that I can think of in cinema of when they say opposites attract. This is very much an opposites attract movie. You would never say, that these are two very similar people, and they work because of that. The other example is it the Countess or the Duchess? I forget. The Baroness, I'm sorry, the Baroness, who the captain was going to be with. The Baroness is like the captain. That's why he got along with her initially, because it wasn't a stretch. He didn't have to fight to understand or anything.
She just needs
he
a
just
man who really, really needs her
yeah,
or her money.
exactly. And so but because they were too similar, he couldn't, it was never going to work. And I love how the movie even deals with the ending of that relationship. It feels very mature, almost unrealistically mature for real life. Most people wouldn't handle a breakup that way, but still, you know, this movie deals with even the relationship of Rolf and Liesel, you know, and their kind of puppy love teenage infatuation, and how that inevitably ends up going way wrong. You know, this movie handles relationships in very unique and specific ways, but none more compelling than Maria and the captain, that I think genuinely works so well.
I just love that moment where she stands up to him for the first time, and you know he's loving it. Like on some level,
Yeah.
it's there. And it's
Well,
just
and
like,
again, she stands up to him and immediately. It's not like it's something that comes up later. Like literally from the moment he starts introducing her to the children and he starts blowing the whistle, she's like, "Oh no, I could never, you know, summon children with a whistle, and I would never report to it myself." But then as soon as he turns away, he blows the whistle. She blows the whistle at him. "Sir, I don't know how to call you." You know, like she's throwing it right back in his face as to how ridiculous he is, pointing out how detached you have gotten from your own children, and in reality to order kids around, especially like the littlest one, Marta and Gretel, who are like, I think Gretel's like 4 or something years old, you know. So uh it's great how she throws it back at him, and then of course conversely how much he learns to appreciate and love her for that.
absolutely. And Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer just have so much chemistry in them.
Mm-hmm.
They're like that moment where you could tell she really realized it when they're dancing there.
Yep.
There's just a spark there. It
Yeah.
felt so magical. And my last general question, thinking about, because we haven't really talked about the children a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot up to this point, is, but why is it so important for a young cast, like the young members of this cast, to do so well for the success of this film?
I I think the big part of why they're so important is because, as much as we've been talking about Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer,
Mhm.
and they are the heart of this film, they are the leads, that's undeniable. The runtime of this film is largely composed of the kids,
Yep.
whether that's the kids with the parents around, because or not even necessarily when they're parents, but you know, when Julie's a governess, it's them trying to find their place in the world. But it's also just, you know, you see kind of the kids have their own interactions with each other from time to time, even their sad, somber little ball game that they try to play with the Baroness, or when they go back to the town, to the Abbey on their own to try to find
Yeah.
Maria. uh Even in how you know, when there is a kid around, or I mean is an adult around, like Maria, and she's like, "Okay, let me try to remember everyone's name," and you know, the two sisters try to trick her as to who has, you know, "I'm Lisa, I'm Brigitte, and you're smart." Like they're able to pick up on, you know, it, these kids have such an intricately woven importance to the film. That's not even getting into their vocal performances, which are
Right.
necessary for many of these songs, because these kids sing a lot throughout this film.
Mhm.
So it's one of the few films where having really good child actors is critically important. This movie,
Absolutely.
if they are not good, especially Liesel, played by Charmaine Carr, who really only did, I think, like one other movie outside of this, which is weird because I thought she was great in this.
Yeah.
But uh, you need these roles to be believable, because if they're not, you're laughing at them. Or at
Mhm.
least if you're not laughing at them, you're at least rolling your eyes and going, "Oh, this is stupid. You guys aren't working." And if and these kids are like 40% of the movie.
Yeah.
That's a large chunk of the movie. It, and if that fails, then the movie fails. Like, period. Even if everything else in the art direction, the score, the music, the singing, the performances of our leads, the actual direction behind the camera, the cinematography, if all of that is perfect, but your kids still suck, 40% of your movie still sucks. That's a failing grade, people. Like, this is not only is this not a Best Picture winner, this is probably not nominated for Best Picture. Like, that's just what it comes down to. So the kids are absolutely critical, and they bring such empathy and relatability to the story, because you can even see yourself in these kids. You can remember being those ages, and maybe your parents weren't a widow, or maybe they were, maybe your parents were divorced, maybe your parents were together your whole life, but you can still see little aspects of each of these kids, whether it's because they're scared of thunder, or because they're having trouble talking to someone, or they have their first teenage crush and they don't know how to handle it and who to talk to. There's so many aspects of these kids that are relatable, that you see yourself in them, and then you're like, I get it why this is a crucial story, and it's challenge for Maria and the captain, but it's also just as crucial a story and crucial a time for these children.
Absolutely. And I love how each of them are uniquely charming in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
They each bring because like they don't all get ton of depth, but they all feel like distinctly different kids.
Yep.
And which was one thing that was crazy. I was convinced that actress who plays the eldest was definitely not 16.
Yeah.
And then I looked it up, and she was actually age appropriate. I'm like, wait a minute. It was one of those kinds of things where I'm like, I was just expecting her to be like a 20-year-old.
Yeah, she always looks it. She looked old, like for her age in that. Yeah, I think.
And I'm just like, holy crap, she's actually 16.
Yeah,
and that's just impressive, because like these were age appropriate kids playing these kids. It isn't like the 90s where you had like 25-year-olds playing 18-year-olds in high school.
Well, I'm looking it up, and I hate to burst your bubble a little bit too much. She was older. She was born in 42, and this came out in 65. So assuming they filmed this the year before it came out, so let's say they filmed it in 64, she would have been 22.
I must have found the wrong date, because
I
know how to do math.
even still, to your point, she plays that age perfectly. Her puppy dog eyes and her infatuation with the Ralph character feels so sincere.
Yeah.
And you believe it instantaneously.
See, that makes a lot more sense then. Because like, who's actually age appropriate playing characters their age?
Yeah.
It's like the weirdest thing when you actually do get age appropriate kids playing roles, and you're just like,
it's bizarre.
It's like the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where they actually have teenagers voicing them. It's just like, what?
The most recent one for me that really made me feel borderline uncomfortable, just because it was so relatable and I could remember, was Bo Burnham's 8th grade, where I'm just like, oh, I remember that. I remember being that awkward. I remember feeling that uncomfortable and not knowing what to do with myself. And
actual 8th graders. And
it's rough.
It's rough. And to wrap things up in summation, quick main points. Why is this a classic?
I think the music is the number one reason. Again, it's just so pervasive. You even if you've never seen this movie, you have heard some of these songs. And when I say some, I mean multiple, not just one, multiple of these songs, maybe even up to a full handful or a dozen. And because of that, this movie has infected pop culture. It is part of our everyday lexicon and zeitgeist. I mean, I remember years ago when Family Guy would parody this and just be like, the family Von Trapp, and like these things are just, they're out there that you think of them. I can't imagine a world without this movie. It's not like I see these every day. I hear these songs, or I hear these quotable words, but the vast majority of this stuff, you can't go a year in your life without hearing this movie referenced multiple times. And I think that's what makes it such a classic, makes it so unique. Because I could tell you, unless you're a big movie person, and if you are a big movie person, that's awesome, don't get me wrong. But like, if I said name the other 4 movies that were nominated from Best Picture in 1965, or anything really about them, I guarantee you the vast majority of people in the world wouldn't even be able to tell you which they are, which are Darling, Dr. Zhivago, Ship of Fools, and A Thousand Clowns. Like,
Oh, I know Dr. Zhivago. I had
yeah,
no idea what the
yeah,
hell
exactly. Like
three
you
movies
maybe
were
heard
when
of
I was
Dr.
looking it over.
Zhivago, but have you even heard A Thousand Clowns? Like, I'd never even heard of that before. But Sound of Music, people have heard of. People still talk about, people still sing the songs. The stage production is still done around the world to this day, and it will just kind of forever be that way. And because of that pervasive impact on our pop culture, it will always be a classic.
Absolutely. And those are all my questions on The Sound of Music. Heath, thank you so much for taking this nice dive into this classic and iconic musical.
Thank you so much again for having me.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.